Alright, welcome to lesson 3 of Econoception, learning economics from diagrams. Okay, so today we are going to look at the demand curve. Okay, so now we have moved on from the PPC and now we have to look at how consumers come into the picture and we're going to look at some of their preferences and how they actually make up, the demand for goods and services. And as usual, we'll start off with a diagram. And this is the very simple demand curve, demand diagram. Basically, it's a downward sloping line that on the y-axis you have the price of a good, which I have labeled in dollars, and the quantity of a good. Okay, so before I actually go into what does all these numbers mean and so on, I will just have to define what demand is. Okay, so demand is actually refers to how much or the quantity of a good or service that the consumer is willing and able to buy at a given price level over a period of time, ceteris paribus. Okay, I've highlighted all the words that are important here, okay? These two, how much quantity and the given price level, are the two different variables that we are actually looking at here. So the demand function or the demand curve relates the quantity demanded of a good or service to a given price level. So basically, if we have the price, we can tell how much quantity that the consumer is willing or able to buy. Okay, so that's the relationship that the demand curve provides. Okay, so that's the relationship that we want to study. And this phrase here, willing and able, means that the consumer must have the purchasing power to buy and not just the desire to buy. If someone is willing to buy something, but he does not have the purchasing power to do so, he's not actually demanding the good. So that's a very specific definition for demand that we have here. Take note that it is over a period of time. In other words, we are always modeling the demand for consumers over a given time period. So demand here is a flow concept. Okay, means for this time period we might have a specific demand, and then for the next time period the demand can change, right? And it's different from a stock concept. For example, it's different from, let's say, wealth. Okay, wealth is known as a stock concept, stock, stock, as opposed to a flow concept like demand. A stock concept means that we are looking at that is measured at a particular point in time rather than over a period of time. Okay, so that's the main difference between these two concepts. And the last thing here is ceteris paribus. Basically means that with everything else held constant. So what this means is that there are many other variables that can possibly affect demand, but now we are just choosing to study the price level and how it affects the quantity demanded of the good. So if other variables which we will look at later, if they change, then the demand for the good will also change. Okay, so hence when we look at this relationship between quantity demanded and the price level, we have to assume that everything else is constant. So once again, demand refers to how much quantity of a good or service that a consumer is willing and able to buy at a given price level over a period of time, ceteris paribus. Okay, so let us go back to the demand curve again. Okay, if you observe from this demand curve, okay, at the price level of $5 for corn, the quantity demanded for corn is $100. So let us now do a hypothetical thought experiment. And suppose now the price of corn increases to $6. Well, at $6, some consumers will now think to themselves, hey, now at $6, I am poorer than before, since with the same amount of money or income, I can buy less of everything. So maybe now I should reconsider my choices. Take note of the word reconsider, okay? It doesn't mean that he will definitely buy less corn, okay? Because he might decide to actually buy more corn, which we look at either at this lesson or in future lessons. And the next thing, some consumers will also think, wow, corn is expensive. Perhaps I'll buy more apples to satisfy my consumption needs instead, since they are relatively cheaper now. So these two effects, the first one is called the income effect, and the second one is called the substitution effect. Usually these two will work in tandem, in the sense that usually they will be in the same direction, meaning when the price of a good increases, consumers will usually feel poorer and they will usually buy less of the good. because they feel poorer now. And the substitution effect basically means that since now corn is more expensive, relatively more expensive, okay, and if they find that apples are a good substitute, they will instead choose to buy apples instead of corn. So this is called a substitution effect. Basically, they're substituting one good for another because of the change in relative prices of the goods. So these are the two effects that takes place, and this explains why the demand curve is actually downward sloping. Because let's say when price increases to $6, we see that the quantity demanded for corn falls from 100 to 50. So in other words, there's a negative relationship between price of corn and the quantity demanded for corn. So as a result, we have a downward sloping demand curve if we connect these 2 points. Okay, so the model that we have here, the simple model, is Q, quantity demanded, equals to A, a constant, minus B, P. Okay, so B is a parameter, or you can just say a coefficient that relates the dependent variable price to quantity. Okay, so what's the assumption of the model? Basically, the assumption of the model is that the income and substitution effects sum up to be negative, which is that when price increases, quantity demanded falls, which I've explained previously. So there are actually exceptions to this case. For example, this thing called a given good. A given good is a good where when the price of the good increases, the quantity demanded of the good actually increases. So I'm going to leave you to think about how that can actually happen, but it's definitely a possibility. And so now we look at what affects the constant term, which is A here. Okay, so basically anything that is not within the model, so anything that is not price but can change will affect A. So I'm going to give you this TIPSEY tipsy that can be used to remember this different factors that can affect A. Okay, so firstly is taste and preferences. So what I mean by taste and preferences? Taste and preferences refer to consumers' preference and taste for the different kinds of goods or for this good. So for example, consumers might suddenly, due to like advertising changes, or maybe due to some kind of this new news report or something that changed their preferences and so on, and they might just suddenly decide that they want to buy more of apples or corn. And like there's a trend going on that perhaps iPhone is more popular than some other phones and so on. So this can be considered as change in taste and preferences that can influence demand. Okay, the next thing is the price of interrelated goods. So what I mean by price of interrelated goods, for example, previously we looked at apples and corn. So I assume that apple is a substitute for corn, which might not be the case, but let's say if it is a substitute, so when the price of apple goes up, right, we will expect that since they are substitutes, people will consume fewer apples and actually switch over to corn. So as a result, the demand for corn will rise. So as you can see, the price of interrelated goods will affect the demand of the good that we're looking at. So conversely, if the interrelated good is a complement, then when the price of the complement goes up, we expect that the demand for the good that we are looking at will fall. Okay, so just do a bit of thinking about this concept, and it should be quite clear. Next thing is population changes. So changes in the population can also affect demand, but these changes tend to be slow and over a long period of time. So it's usually not very significant, but in general, when population increases, we expect there will be an increase in demand for most goods and services. Okay, the next thing is seasonal factors. So for example, some goods like winter coats or skis tend to sell better when it's winter time, and like for example, some stuff like popsicles and ice cream could sell better when it's summer. So all these seasonal factors could also influence demand. And next is expectation of future prices. So if consumers expect that prices will rise in the future, they might then decide to consume more now. So this is actually a speculative effect, because by expecting prices will rise in the future, they will thus decide to increase their consumption right now. Lastly is disposable income, which is a short form as YD. Okay, disposable income basically refers to income received after tax is taken into account. So after paying for taxes, whatever is left is known as the disposable income. Okay, so when a consumer's disposable income rises, right? So naturally they will be richer now. They can purchase more goods and services. Their consumption bundle, consumption possibility choices increases. So as a result, there might be an increase in demand for the goods and services that we are looking at. So to illustrate on this diagram, a change in the factors, tipsy, any of the factors will result in a shift in the demand curve. So why is it a shift? Because the demand curve only models the relationship between price and the quantity of a good. So anything that's not price, okay, basically will result in a shift because what happens is that at any given price level, the quantity demanded will be higher now. For example, if people expect corn prices to rise in the future, right, so they will demand more corn, and it's regardless of the price level of corn. So at any given price level, we expect that consumers will demand more corn now than before because of a change in expectations of the future. So take note that anything that is not price will result in a shift in the demand curve, whereas anything that's a change in price will result in a movement along the demand curve. So these are the two main differences. Okay, and so in summary, demand refers to how much quantity of a good or service a consumer is willing and able to buy at a given price level over a period of time, ceteris paribus. And there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity due to the substitution and income effects. The changes in price result in movements along the demand curve, which is changes in quantity demanded, and changes in other factors affecting the constant terms results in shifts of the demand curve, which is changes in demand. So that's all for today's lesson. It's quite a short one, and hope that you'll join me next lesson because if you recall, we still have some unanswered questions from the PPC lesson. Well, that's because we will cover them eventually, but we have to build up the foundation first to answer those questions. And the next lesson we'll be looking at the supply curve. So do join me, and till next time, dream economics.